So it's written that in the beginning was the One, and there was nothing other than the One. Is that true?
Yes, but there's no beginning. That's a concept that happens within the One. The One is not subject to beginnings and endings. It is just existence itself. It just is.
Okay. And why does God let the worst crimes happen on earth without using his or her power to stop it?
You must understand that that question is extremely outdated in terms of the perspective of what God is all about. Everything is made of God. Everything is made from God. Everything is God. There are no exceptions. God is not outside controlling things. The idea is that if God, all that is everything, it doesn't exert its will on anything. Everything that happens is part of God. So there's no idea of controlling it. Everything just is an experience of God, by God, in God, from God. Everything can be learned from. Everything can be used in a positive way if you are willing to use it that way. The questions and the way you're asking cause much confusion and misunderstanding on your planet by asking questions that are human-based questions from a human perspective. God does not function in the way you are asking the question.
Is there good and evil? And is evil the same as negative? Or how can you help us understand that?
From our perspective, again, it's not a value judgment. It is simply a recognition that there are positive, negative, and neutral situations, mechanically speaking. Negative is that which causes the experience of segregation, separation, diminishment, disconnection. That doesn't mean you actually are disconnected, but it can create an experience of disconnection. Positive is that which integrates, causes the experience of connection, allows you to realize you are always connected, and creates an expansive awareness of consciousness. The idea, therefore, is that the concept of evil is simply an individual who becomes fixated in their intention to promote the idea of the negative mechanism as an actual intention. But the idea is that negative mechanisms are in and of themselves not value judged as evil. It is simply the idea of how things are utilized, because even positive mechanisms can be used in a negative way, and negative mechanisms can be used in a positive way. So it is simply the idea of the recognition of intention as to whether to align with the flow of positive creation or the receding energy of negative creation.
And so why is it on this particular planet that such horrible things happen, and it seems like anything goes here. Anything can happen in the negative direction or the positive.
Again, from the soul's point of view, these are all opportunities to learn how to transform things in a way that teaches you more about who you are as an aspect and a projection of all that is. So giving you challenges to transform, giving you challenges to overcome, allowing you to learn to transform from negative to positive in your experiential reality, allows you to discover more about your own innate power as an expression and an extension of all that is. Without these challenges, you do not learn, you do not grow. I'm not saying you have to have them to the degree that you've had them, but the idea is they give you an opportunity to discover who you truly are in any number of given situations, whether they are positive or negative. It's just that the negative ones provide the challenge that allow you the opportunity to overcome things you don't prefer, to see if you can transform them, to see if you can exercise your power on earth, to see if you can remember that you are an aspect of all that is. It is given to you. It is in your hands to make that determination. The idea of all that is doesn't make that determination for you, other than the idea that it presents itself because of the neutral central point as approximately 51% positive and 49% negative. But it's up to you to determine which way you prefer to go. Even when given a negative scenario, that is operating negatively, mechanically speaking, energetically speaking, it is up to you to determine whether to feed the negative energy or feed the positive energy. That is your power, the freedom to choose, the freedom to be the unique aspect of all that is that you are. And without those challenges, you do not grow.
Is the fire and brimstone devil based on Cernunnos represented in any other ET civilizations? And why would a group worship it as an archetype of God rather than as a typical benevolent version?
Cernunnos is a nature spirit. And the idea is that on one level, it can function as an archetype, but it functions more as an archetype of nature itself. As an aspect of all that is, as an aspect of God, nature certainly is an archetype, and many aspects of nature can be represented as archetypes. But Cernunnos is specifically about the idea of the, shall we say, shepherd of nature, the caretaker of nature, the caretaker of the nature spirits. And the idea that it has been perceived negatively is simply the idea of the result of more modernized interpretations that are fear-based, that have to do with your experience as a culture in the disconnection of yourself from nature, the lack of realization that you are nature, an expression of it. So fear-based beliefs have transformed the idea of the caretaker of nature into something negative for many people in their belief system doctrines.
Now, this question says, well, why did he allow his image to be altered to one of evil rather than having it remain one of nature?
Again, the question is asked from a misunderstood point of view. It is not up to Cernunnos to decide how individuals may perceive him. Just as, why does anyone allow anyone else to perceive them negatively when that may not be the actual truth? So the idea is that you don't have the power to disallow. You can explain, you can share how it might not be that way, but another person still has the power to decide to treat you in a negative way. So it's not about the idea that Cernunnos allows or doesn't allow that. All you have to do is look more closely in the deeper understanding of that particular being to understand that it doesn't have to be looked at negatively, that it can be understood from a positive point of view. But being a nature spirit, it does, like anything, contain the ability to reflect positive or negative attributes, depending upon how one decides to view it, what the perspective of the person viewing it has based on how they filter that perspective through their own positive or negative belief systems. So again, the idea is Cernunnos has no more ability to allow or disallow anyone to perceive him in whatever way a person decides they're going to perceive him.
And in mythology, there are many stories of gods killing other gods. How does that relate to all that is? And is it true that once the supreme god was actually a goddess, but that she was destroyed by a male god?
These things are, again, more representative archetypally of the struggle within humanity to balance itself between the male and the female energies. Some of those stories, some of them, are representative of actual events between extraterrestrial beings that were connected to your Earth, especially considering the Anunnaki times. But most of that is simply the representation of the suppression of different energies that are not allowed to be balanced in your society, played out on an archetypal energy level in your consciousness.
And in the Holy Bible, there is an account of the deluge claiming God to be the cause. Aside from the idea that God is behind everything, can you tell us anything about what caused the deluge in a physical sense? Is it related to the asteroid belt? And if not, what is it that caused the asteroid belt?
Yes, the deluge that you're referring to is the result of an asteroidal impact in the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, the breakup of the planet in the orbit now occupied by the asteroid belt that is usually referred to as Maldek or Marduk, caused many different sized of debris of rocks and so on and so forth, many of which have struck your planet as well as other planets and caused extinctions to occur. So the idea of the deluge is simply a reference to the massive tsunami that occurred from the impact of an asteroid in the Atlantic Ocean that impacted the coasts of many places that border the Atlantic Ocean, including the idea of the submergence of Atlantis. The idea being that at that time, there was much strife and conflict that existed in the collective consciousness of the Atlantean civilization. Thus, the idea, again, sort of placed in stereotypical terminology of the idea of God causing the destruction, whereas it's simply a recognition that natural forces have consequences for choices that are made. So the negative energy of the Atlantean civilization in their attempt to conquer other civilizations, when they fell to hubris and forgot their balanced state, allowed them to experience the attraction of shifting to a parallel reality where their civilization was destroyed. So the idea is not so much to blame the idea on God as a causation, but simply the recognition that whatever it is you choose, especially collectively, will bring about your ability to navigate to a parallel version of Earth that will demonstrate the consequences of the energy that you're holding on to.
So, given all the strife and conflict on the planet now, and like during World War II and World War I, how come nothing like that happened again?
It can, but you can avoid it. As we have said, the idea now exists that you are replaying many different scenarios from what you would call the past. You're replaying the Atlantean scenario, you're replaying the Orion scenario, attempting to transform negative to positive, darkness to light, so that you don't necessarily have to experience the same things that have been experienced in what you call your history. The idea, therefore, is you are being given opportunities to change your course, to make different choices, to experience consequences in a more positive light, but it's still in your hands and it's still up to you. Things like that could happen, although right now what you are experiencing is a potential lead up to it with the different kinds of what you call disasters and epidemics and so on and so forth, droughts and famines and floods that are being played out on your planet are kind of like a preview of coming attractions if you stay on the course of destruction. But you still have time to turn it around. You still have time to shift in the direction, to navigate in the direction of more positive versions of parallel versions of Earth. The choice is yours. So make a choice and incorporate that into your lives more effectively.
And who were the ETs that Moses in the Bible and other persons from the Bible interacted with? And what was the light on Mount Sinai and the burning bush?
Some of the extraterrestrials that Moses interacted with were the idea of the Anunnaki attempting to correct what the original group of Anunnaki caused by the creation of Homo sapiens on your planet, and attempted to guide and preserve certain genetic lines that would allow for the eventual evolution of the Earth into the sixth hybrid race. Some were not Anunnaki. We have been asked this question before, and we are not allowed to discuss that race. The idea of the light is simply the light from a craft, the energy from a craft landing on the mountain that interacted with Moses. The idea of the burning bush, again, a holographic projection of energy that was interpreted as fire. Similar in many ways to what people on your planet have been experiencing today as orbs of energy, orbs of light. So interpreted in an old-fashioned way, because that was all that was understood. Energy at the time was not understood in the way you understand it now scientifically. Therefore, it was perceived as a fire, when all it was basically an orb of glowing energy to represent a communication modality, a probe that would allow for communication to occur between the extraterrestrials and the individual experiencing the idea of the burning of the orb. It used the idea of a bush kind of similarly to the idea of anchoring it to a spot, like an antenna.
So you've mentioned before that if we were to time travel back in time, because our frequency is much higher now, that we would glow if we encountered the historical beings.
You would appear to them to glow, yes.
Yeah. So did Jesus appear to glow also?
From time to time, yes. This is what is usually referred to as the transfiguration in your religious doctrines. The idea that he was perceived as being surrounded by a glowing aura.
And this person is saying, I'm left with a distinct impression that virtually all angels described as light beings that came from the sky and the stars in most religious doctrines are actually highly advanced aliens from other civilizations that have visited Earth. Is that correct?
Not all, but most. Extra dimensionals, extraterrestrials, beings of higher frequency, but sometimes spirit beings as well that can manifest themselves to appear as if they are physical when they may not be. So it's a variety of things, yes.
Okay. And this person's asking about ancient Greece. I'm currently being taught in universities that Hera was oppressed in relation to Zeus, and that women were not respected in ancient Greece or any other parts of the world. My intuition tells me that's wrong, especially since there were like temples to Hera and things like that. So did the ancient Greeks truly view Hera as a goddess?
Yes. The idea again represents the struggle that humanity has gone through with regard to the idea of the balancing of the male and female energies. Now, yes, you are correct. This is not true at the time for the entire planet. Different portions of the planet, different cultures on your planet have gone through things in different ways at different times with respect to the balancing of the male and female energy. But definitely there have always been portions that did respect the balance and express the balance, or at the very least did respect the feminine energy. And as you say, as you point out, erected temples to demonstrate that fact. So it's not really just as simple as everyone doing the same thing on your planet at the same time.
And are Metatron, Thoth, and Hermes the same archetype?
Thoth and Hermes are similar in vibrational energy. The idea of Metatron is something different. Metatron is more of an archetypal representation of the underlying template of reality as you experience it, more of a geometric format, more of an expression of the foundation upon which you build consciousness to create certain reality experiences.
You've spoken about Atlantis, but I heard about Mu Lemuria for the first time from your channelings recently. Can you provide us with information about them beyond the idea that they were rivals with the Atlanteans?
Well, they weren't really rivals in the sense that you might mean that today. The idea is that Atlantis was an offshoot or a colony eventually, but you have to understand that Mu existed in the Western South Pacific Ocean, and by migrating to what you now recognize as North America, were responsible for creating many of the indigenous cultures in North, Central, and South America that eventually migrated across the continent to create Atlantis as a colony that existed much, much later than Mu. While some Lemurians still existed, at the beginning of Atlantis, almost none existed by the end of Atlantis because of different changes physiologically, geologically that took place on your planet that broke up the land masses in what you now consider to be the Eastern Asian areas, South Pacific areas, creating islands and so on and so forth, that used to be connected when the oceans were much lower. So the idea of Atlantis came much, much later.
And the water erosion on the Sphinx has caused some people to theorize it was built when the environment was more jungle-like.
Yes.
What did the Sphinx look like after its initial construction? And, what were the features of the face? And was it painted or decorated in any way?
It was painted and decorated, and it featured the idea of Anubis. You have still representations on your planet of many different depictions of Anubis reclining, in a sense, like what you would consider a canine to be sitting on the floor, all four paws down, sitting on top of a box. The idea is that the structure was a large representation of Anubis. The representation of the chamber upon which Anubis sits are the underground chambers underneath the Sphinx.
And the resistance that at the university level of any kind of exploration of the Sphinx and the erosion and the things that indicate that it's older than they originally thought, is that correct, that it is much older than they thought?
Yes, it goes back to at least 10,500 BC, as you say, because the idea is that it was built around the same time as the Great Pyramid and certain other structures on your planet that acted for the purpose of preserving information that was destroyed in Atlantis.
Yes, which leads to this question. This person is saying that they love books and that things like species that go extinct here and libraries that have disappeared, and such as the Library of Alexandria, the Mayan libraries, all that have been destroyed. Have these been actually taken to other locations to preserve them? And if they hadn't been destroyed, what would our civilization be like now?
Some of the information, not all, has been preserved in other locations, some of which you have found and some of which you have yet to find. If the Library of Alexandria had not been destroyed, you would certainly consider Atlantis to be part of your history. That's one change that would have happened, because there was a lot of information about that culture preserved in the Library of Alexandria. Some of that information still exists in other places, some of which we have just mentioned in terms of chambers under the Sphinx. But the idea also would be that your technology would be somewhat different as well, and would be more based on the idea of vibrational resonance at this point, rather than the idea of the polluting technologies you have been using.
Are any of these libraries have material taken off planet, in a sense, by other ETs or anything like that to preserve them, or no?
Well, that was really not necessary, because as we have said, one of the great gifts humanity will be given when you start to really have open contact is that you will be presented with a device that will actually show you the full range of your history. So through the observations that have happened from extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional sources, it wasn't really necessary to absolutely preserve the information that existed on your planet, although some of that was done, but not that much, because the extraterrestrials already had, through their observation of you for thousands of years, already recorded all of your history and didn't really need your version of it for the most part. Some of it was preserved for, shall we say, sentimental or nostalgic reasons, but that's not because the extraterrestrials needed to preserve it. They already had all that information recorded in their own devices. And again, that will be presented to you when open contact is fully established with your planet. You will be given back your full history.
And what can you tell us about the Egyptian goddess archetypes Bastet and Sekhmet? Do they have any ET connections? And what does it mean when they keep showing up symbolically in somebody's life over and over again?
Well, Bastet in particular has to do with connections to other dimensions and understanding of knowledge that is accessed through other dimensions, through the spirit realm, but connected to the idea of the animal known as the cat on your planet, who can see interdimensionally. So when it keeps showing up synchronistically, it might be for that person a general indication, although some specifics will need to be understood about that particular person. But as a general indicator, might be an indication of the ability to go into the vibrational frequency that is similar to the idea of the animal represented by the cat on your planet, that can see spirits, that can see and make connections and communicate with spirits in the spiritual realm, in the non-physical realm. Sekhmet, we will talk about at another time.
Okay. And this is a question, a yoga question. Raja Yoga meditation practices to realize oneness with God or union of individual soul with omnipresent spirit. I know you've described these all as permission slips, but it seems to be a very comprehensive system similar to the formula. So is yoga science essentially our birthright?
Well, all things in your reality are your birthright. But the idea of yoga stretches back many thousands upon thousands of years and actually did begin in Lemurian times, in Muin times. The idea, as we have said, is that yes, everything is a permission slip, but some of them are vibrationally connected to the larger portions of the archetypal representations in your collective consciousness, and thus will work for more people than other permission slips might, that might bring a more specific energy for smaller groups or individuals. So many different kinds of permission slips are connected more directly to the collective consciousness and thus can work for many people, whereas others might be more specifically tailored to smaller groups or individuals.
And could you explain what the Merkabah is and what levels of existence it's relevant to?
The Merkabah, in a sense, is an energetic representation vibrationally of the connection between physical and non-physical reality. In a sense, it's a geometrized, symbolic version of the transition between physical and non-physical reality, which many beings have described as the so-called tunnel of light.
And can you tell us about Guanyin and her role, as well as Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene? They all seem to be related because of the feminine energy, but
Yes.
I don't. So,
well, again, the idea is paramount to the concept of incorporating and balancing the female energy in your societies, of allowing you to understand the power of the feminine energy and to also incorporate the feminine energy in the masculine energy in a way that allows the power of the masculine energy to not be expressed in a negative way. So again, it's important for the balancing of all energies, male and female, just as it is important for the positive male energy to be balanced with the feminine energy, so that the female representation can express itself assertively, while the male energy incorporating the feminine energy also can balance itself not into aggression, but again, into a statement of assertion, so that it becomes balanced in the center, in the neutral place, as a declaration of who you are fully, as an expression of all that is. So the introduction of any representation of the feminine archetype into your society at this time would be primarily for the purpose of acting as a balancing mechanism to blend and balance the male and female energies. This is why the idea of the Magdalene was the equal opposite, so to speak, of the individual understood as Jesus Christ, and why Magdalene was his primary disciple, and more than that. So together, the two of them are really more representative of the idea of what has, shall we say, been misunderstood as the information shared by Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It should have come as a duality. It should have come as a new form of Trinity. But again, because of the fear-based beliefs in the male energy at the time in that culture, the female part was not accepted due to the insecurities of the masculine disciples.
Okay. And are there machine-like civilizations such as the ones depicted in films like the Transformers? What sorts of gods do machine-based life forms idolize, if any? And are any of these civilizations curious about humans?
Although they don't look like your science fiction representations, there are machine-like civilizations. We have not encountered that many, but we have encountered a few. Many of them are very different from one another. We have not encountered any that, in your definition, idolize anything, for they operate on pure intelligence and understand that they are a part of creation and play a very different role archetypally for many other civilizations that are not necessarily machine-based. Now, again, do understand, of course, that the physical form of even your bodies, even though what you would call organic, are still machine-like. And therefore, the idea of the machine civilizations are not necessarily made out of what you would consider to be nuts and bolts, so to speak, but are formed from different kinds of materials, different kinds of alloys, different kinds of mixing and matching of the understanding of advanced forms of chemistry and polymers and materials you know nothing about yet to represent the physical forms that they take. You would still perhaps perceive them as machine-like, but perhaps, and again, not identical, but a closer representation of something that would be considered machine-like and yet nothing like your representation of the Transformers would be the representation depicted in your science fiction film AI at the end.
Yes.